Ever feel like understanding mental health is kind of like having a superpower? Like it helps us decode ourselves and the people around us better. And today, we're going deep on a few conditions: anxiety disorders, depression, and bipolar disorder.
And what's really cool is we're going to weave in some real life stories along the way. These stories aren't just about clinical terms, they're about real people.
Exactly. So let's kick things off with anxiety. Okay, so picture this. You're about to give a big presentation or you're having a tough conversation. Heart's pounding, you can't sit still. We've all been there, right? But when does that everyday anxiety become something more serious?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's about intensity and how long it sticks around. We're talking excessive fear and anxiety, the kind that throws your whole life out of whack. Think about generalized anxiety disorder.
GAD. Right.
Yeah, GAD. Someone with GAD might be worrying nonstop about stuff that most people wouldn't even bat an eye at. And these worries, they feel uncontrollable.
So it's not just stress, it's like worry takes over.
Exactly, like a broken record in their head that they just can't shut off. Then you've got panic disorder, which is a whole different beast.
Oh yeah, panic attacks. Those sound absolutely terrifying.
They can be. Imagine this. You're just going about your day, right?
Right.
And bam, out of nowhere, this wave of intense fear hits you. Your heart's racing. You might feel dizzy, short of breath, like you're having a heart attack even. It can be so intense that people start avoiding anything that might trigger it.
I can see that. Like their world starts shrinking because they're so afraid of having another attack.
Precisely. And then there's social anxiety disorder. This is way more than just being shy. We're talking an intense fear of social situations.
Like they're afraid of being judged or something.
Exactly. It can totally mess with their work, relationships, just their overall well-being. Like even just ordering coffee can be overwhelming.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. One story that really stayed with me was Jessica's. She had JD, and all her anxiety was around her career and relationships. I mean, she was constantly worried, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work.
See, Jessica's story, it's so relatable, right? Because on the surface, she was successful, but underneath, her anxiety was eating away at her. But here's the good news. Like a lot of anxiety disorders, GAD is treatable.
That's where therapy comes in, right? What kind of things can therapy actually help with?
Well, take Jessica, for example. Therapy could give her some tools to cope. Things like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. It helps you pinpoint and then challenge those negative thought patterns that feed anxiety.
So it's like instead of spiraling with what ifs, she learns to hit pause and actually examine those thoughts.
Exactly. And therapy can also teach some relaxation techniques like deep breathing, mindfulness. It's all about calming the mind and body, turning down the volume on those anxiety symptoms.
Like building a mental first aid kit for anxiety, right?
That's a great way to put it. And those tools help people manage their anxiety and start taking back control of their lives.
Stories like Jessica's make it clear that asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. It takes real courage to face those anxieties head on. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about depression. I feel like it's a term everyone throws around, but there's so many misconceptions.
You're right. Depression isn't just feeling a little down. It's like this all-encompassing state that affects how you think, how you feel, how you act.
Major depressive disorder.
Yeah, major depressive disorder. We're talking sadness, hopelessness, losing interest in things you used to enjoy. And these feelings last for weeks, even months.
It's like a weight dragging you down, right? Like you're just slogging through mud.
Perfect analogy. You wake up exhausted, feeling empty. It affects your sleep, how much you eat, your focus. Even easy tasks feel impossible.
And wasn't there another type of depression? Dysthymia.
Right, sometimes called persistent depressive disorder. It's like this chronic low-grade depression. The symptoms may not be as intense as major depression, but they can drag on for years.
Like that persistent drizzle we talked about earlier versus the sudden downpour.
Hmm.
Both can be awful in their own way. We read John's story, and it was a real eye-opener. He was a college student, great grades and all, but secretly battling depression.
John's story, it busts that myth that depression only hits certain kinds of people. Here's this high-achieving student, and yet, deep down, he was struggling with some serious feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness. You just never know what someone's dealing with behind closed doors.
It's so true. And I bet that isolation made it even tougher for him to reach out for help.
Absolutely. That isolation feeds the problem. The good news is John, like many others, found relief through therapy. Learning to identify and challenge those negative thoughts, those are key skills.
I love the idea of regaining his zest for life. Like therapy helped him rediscover what brought him joy in the first place.
Exactly. It's about finding those glimmers of hope and making your way back to a life that feels fulfilling. And that's the message we really want to drive home here. Depression is treatable, it's a medical condition, not a personal failing. Getting help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
So we've talked about anxiety and depression. Often they go hand in hand. But now let's get into something a bit more complex and, honestly, often misunderstood. Bipolar disorder. What sets this one apart?
Bipolar disorder, it's all about these dramatic swings in mood and energy. It's not just feeling up and down. We're talking extreme highs and lows. And those highs, we call those mania or hypomania. The lows, of course, those are the depressive episodes.
So you're basically riding a roller coaster.
A pretty intense roller coaster. Imagine during a manic episode, someone feels euphoric, like they're on top of the world, they can do anything. Thoughts racing, talking nonstop, tons of energy, barely sleeping.
Sounds almost like a superpower, in a way.
It can feel that way, yeah. But there's a flip side. During mania, people might do things they wouldn't normally do. Risky stuff. Spending sprees, impulsive decisions, even reckless driving. It's like their judgment takes a vacation.
So there's a danger there, too.
Yeah.
And then comes the crash, right? The depression.
Exactly. And it's a harsh contrast. During a depressive episode, that same person might feel intense sadness, fatigue, just lose interest in everything. It's like all that manic energy gets sucked away, leaving this emptiness and despair.
I'm starting to see why this is such a difficult condition to manage. And there were different types of bipolar disorder, right?
Right. We have bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. With bipolar 1, those manic episodes, they're super intense, can really disrupt someone's life. Bipolar 2, the highs aren't quite as extreme. We call it hypomania. But those depressive episodes, they're still very real and challenging.
So knowing the difference helps you understand how it might affect someone's life. We read about Emma. She was diagnosed with bipolar 2, and it was amazing to read about how she manages it.
Emma's story is a perfect example of how proactive management can really make a difference. She learned to spot the early signs of both her hypomanic and depressive episodes.
Like she became an expert on herself.
Exactly. And that self-awareness helps her adjust her treatment, her therapy, even just her self-care routine to stay on track.
It's so inspiring to hear that she's not just coping, she's thriving. She's got her career, her personal life. It gives a lot of hope to people listening, I think.
Absolutely. Emma's story shows us that it's possible for people with bipolar disorder to live full, productive lives. It takes work, commitment, and good support, but it can be done. And that's a powerful message to carry forward.
It's kind of wild to think about how much we've already uncovered about anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. You know, I used to think of them as completely separate things, but now I'm starting to see those connections. It's fascinating.
That's the beauty of these deep dives. We get to connect those dots and go way beyond those simple definitions. And while we've been focusing on these three, it's super important to remember that there are so many other conditions that people might be facing.
Right, because mental health is so much more than just a diagnosis. It's about the whole spectrum of human experiences.
Exactly. Remember when we briefly mentioned OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, those unwanted thoughts, those obsessions, and then those compulsions, the repetitive behaviors that try to ease the anxiety.
It's like this vicious cycle, right? The obsession triggers the anxiety, the compulsion gives you a little relief, but then the obsession pops up again, and around you go.
You nailed it. It's a cycle that can be incredibly tough to break. For example, someone with OCD might be fixated on contamination. They feel this urge to wash their hands over and over, even if their skin is raw.
It makes you realize just how much distress these conditions can cause. And then there's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I know it can develop after someone goes through something traumatic, but what does that really look like day to day?
It can show up in a lot of ways. Someone with PTSD might relive the trauma, through flashbacks, nightmares. They might be super jumpy, easily startled, constantly on edge.
Like their nervous system is stuck in overdrive.
Exactly. And the symptoms vary a lot. Some people isolate themselves, others have anger issues or trouble concentrating. There can be this intense guilt or shame, even if what happened wasn't their fault at all.
It's heartbreaking to think about the things some people go through and how those experiences just keep affecting them. Reading Sarah's story really got to me. She developed PTSD after a car accident, a bad one. Her journey of recovery was so powerful.
Sarah's story is a great reminder that recovery is absolutely possible, even after a really traumatic experience. She had the flashbacks, nightmares, that hypervigilance you talked about. But through therapy and a support group, she learned how to manage her symptoms and actually reclaim her life.
It's stories like Sarah's that give people hope. It shows that even when things feel impossible, there's a path forward.
I agree. And it also highlights just how important it is to reach out for professional help and find a community that gets it. Those connections can be so crucial in healing. And we can't forget about eating disorders. They're often misunderstood, like it's just about food or vanity. But eating disorders are complex mental illnesses, and they have serious consequences for both physical and mental health.
I'm so glad you brought those up. We hear about anorexia and bulimia, but could you break those down for our listeners?
Sure. Anorexia nervosa is when people severely restrict what they eat. It comes from this intense fear of weight gain, even if they're already underweight. They might exercise like crazy or misuse laxatives and diuretics.
It's like their body image is distorted, right? They
E-
don't see themselves the way others do.
Exactly. And that distorted perception is incredibly tough to overcome. Then you have bulimia nervosa. It's a cycle of binge eating followed by purging behaviors like self-induced vomiting or misusing laxatives.
So it's not just about the food. It's about this feeling of losing control around eating and then desperately trying to compensate.
Right. And these behaviors, they're often hidden, and there's a lot of shame and guilt tied to them. It's crucial to remember that eating disorders aren't about willpower or vanity. They are serious mental illnesses that require professional help.
And if they're not treated, they can have devastating effects on someone's health.
So, bottom line, if you or someone you know is struggling with an eating disorder, please reach out for support. We've covered so much today, the different characteristics of these conditions, but I think what stands out to me is how these stories, like Jessica's, John's, Emma's, and Sarah's, they all show how powerful resilience and recovery can be. Absolutely. These stories highlight that while these conditions can be incredibly tough, they don't have to be a life sentence. With the right kind of support and resources, people can learn to manage them and live full, meaningful lives. And that's something we want every listener to hear loud and clear.
Yes, it's about giving people the knowledge, the understanding, the hope they need. So as we move forward in this deep dive, I think it's time to shift gears and think about what we can do as individuals and as a society to promote mental well-being and advocate for change. But where do we even start with something so big?
It starts with a shift in our thinking. We need to stop seeing mental health as something separate from our overall well-being. It's not just about the absence of illness. It's about actively building mental wellness, just like we work on our physical health.
So we're talking about creating a culture where mental health is just as important.
Exactly. And that means breaking down stigma, raising awareness, and fighting for better resources and support systems.
I love that. It's about making it okay for someone to say, hey, I'm having a tough time mentally, without fear of judgment at work or anywhere else.
Imagine a workplace where that's the norm. It would be amazing. But how do we get there? What can our listeners do to be a part of this change? It can start small, really. Educate yourself about mental health so you can challenge those myths and stereotypes out there.
Knowledge is power, right? The more we understand, the more we can dismantle those harmful stigmas.
You got it. And you can be an advocate in your own circles. Talk about mental health with your friends, family, colleagues. Share resources, personal stories, articles you find helpful.
Normalize the conversation. Make it okay to talk about mental health honestly and openly.
That's it. And you can advocate on a bigger scale, too. Support organizations doing great work. Push for policies that put mental well-being front and center. Even sharing information on social media can make a difference.
It's incredible how these small actions can contribute to something much bigger.
It's that ripple effect, right? Every action, no matter how small, can create a positive impact. And remember, advocating for mental health isn't just about helping others. It's about taking care of yourself, too.
That's such a good point. You can't pour from an empty cup. So let's talk about some things people can do every day to support their own mental well-being.
Self-care is so important, and it doesn't have to be fancy or expensive. It's about making time for the things that feed your mind, body, and soul.
What are some simple but effective self-care practices that our listeners can try?
Think about what brings you joy and helps you recharge. Spending time outdoors, listening to music, reading, taking a bath, or even just enjoying a cup of tea.
It's about finding those moments that make you feel grounded.
You got it. And don't underestimate the power of moving your body.
Yeah.
Exercise has huge benefits for your mental health.
It doesn't have to be hardcore workouts, right? Just getting moving can make a difference.
Absolutely. Even a brisk walk or some stretching can work wonders. And while we're talking about movement, let's not forget about sleep.
Sleep is so crucial, but it's often the first thing to go when life gets crazy.
It's true. But good sleep, it's essential for regulating your emotions, keeping your brain sharp, just your overall well-being.
So any tips for making sleep a priority when life is so demanding?
It starts with a consistent sleep schedule, even on weekends. Create a relaxing bedtime routine, avoid caffeine and alcohol before bed, and make sure your bedroom is dark, quiet, and cool.
Like a sleep sanctuary.
Exactly. And try some mindfulness practices like meditation or deep breathing. They're incredibly helpful for stress and anxiety.
I hear so much about mindfulness these days, but I'll admit I haven't really tried it. What's the basic idea?
It's all about paying attention to the present moment, without judgment, just noticing your thoughts and feelings without getting carried away by them.
So creating some space between a thought or feeling and how you react to it.
Exactly. That space gives you the power to respond to challenges more thoughtfully instead of just reacting.
It sounds like a valuable tool for dealing with overwhelming emotions.
It really is. And it's a skill you can develop over time. Even a few minutes of mindful breathing each day can have a big impact.
Okay, so we've covered self-care, exercise, sleep, mindfulness. What else can we do to boost our mental well-being?
Don't forget the importance of connecting with others. We're wired for connection, and strong relationships are so vital for our mental health. Make time for those meaningful interactions with friends, family, the people you care about.
It's about nurturing the relationships that make you feel loved and supported.
Exactly. Find activities that give you a sense of belonging and purpose. Volunteer in your community, join a club, or just make an effort to connect with people who matter to you.
Because loneliness and isolation can be really damaging to our mental health.
Right. They can make existing conditions worse and even contribute to new ones developing. Building those social connections is like creating a safety net for your mental well-being.
And of course, there's no shame in seeking professional help when you need it.
Absolutely not. It's actually a sign of strength and self-awareness. If you're struggling, a therapist can provide guidance, coping strategies, and evidence-based treatments.
They can be like a guide, helping you navigate those choppy waters and find your way towards healing.
And remember, mental health is a journey, not a destination. You're going to have ups and downs, twists and turns along the way. But with the right tools and support, you can navigate those challenges and live a rich and meaningful life.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Well said. And speaking of progress, let's talk about how important it is to challenge the stigma around mental health and be an advocate for greater awareness.
Because silence only makes the problem worse.
Right, exactly. We have to break down the barriers that keep people from getting help and create a culture where mental health is treated with the same importance as physical health.
So what can each of us do to change these attitudes?
Education is a powerful tool. The more we learn about mental health, the better we can challenge those misconceptions and replace them with empathy and understanding.
We need to talk about mental health, normalize it, and encourage people to reach out when they're struggling.
You got it. And you can use your voice to advocate for better resources and policies. Support organizations that are making a difference and speak up when you see injustice.
It's about creating a world where everyone can thrive, no matter their mental health challenges.
Now, let's zoom in on the workplace because mental health is just as critical in our professional lives as it is in our personal lives.
So true. Work can be a huge source of stress, but it can also be a place where we find purpose and fulfillment.
The key is to create work environments that prioritize mental well-being.
What can employers do to foster a mentally healthy workplace?
It all starts with encouraging open communication, where people feel safe talking about their mental health without worrying about judgment or repercussions.
Creating a safe and supportive environment is crucial.
Right. And employers can offer resources like employee assistance programs, counseling services, and flexible work arrangements.
These resources can be game changers for employees who are struggling.
And remember, even small things can make a big difference. Regular check-ins, social events, promoting work-life balance.
It's about creating a culture of care and understanding.
Right. And addressing workplace stressors is so important. Unrealistic workloads, long hours, lack of control, these can really impact mental health.
So employers need to pay attention to these factors and create systems and policies that truly support employees' well-being.
Exactly. By making mental health a priority in the workplace, employers benefit too. You get more engaged, productive, and fulfilled employees. It's a win-win.
Definitely. Now, what about the role of technology in mental health? It's kind of a double-edged sword, don't you think?
It really is. It can be both incredibly helpful and a source of stress.
Right. Like it could be a great tool, but also a huge distraction.
Well, think about it. Technology has made accessing mental health resources and support easier than ever. There are tons of apps, websites, online communities that provide information, guidance, and connection.
Like a virtual mental health toolkit.
But on the other hand, Too much screen time, constantly comparing yourself on social media, the never-ending flow of information that can really do a number on your mental health.
It's so easy to get sucked into that digital world and lose sight of what's truly important.
You've got to use technology mindfully, set some boundaries, limit your screen time, and make time for real-life connections.
Finding that balance in the digital age is key.
Now let's talk about something super important, early intervention. When it comes to mental health, the sooner we address those challenges, the better the outcome.
Like catching a cold before it turns into pneumonia.
Perfect analogy. Early signs of trouble might include changes in mood, behavior, sleep, appetite.
It's about paying attention to those subtle shifts and reaching out for help when you need it.
Don't wait until it becomes a crisis. Early intervention can make a world of difference.
And it's important to remember that mental health exists on a spectrum. We all have ups and downs throughout our lives.
It's not about being perfect. It's about having the tools and support to navigate the tough times and live a life you love.
And that's what this deep dive has been all about. Giving you the knowledge and understanding to approach mental health with compassion and awareness.
We've covered a lot of ground, from understanding different conditions to strategies for promoting well-being and being an advocate for change.
So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
This. Mental health matters. It's a core part of our overall well-being and deserves the same attention and care as our physical health.
By taking care of our mental health, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and seeking support when we need it, we can build a world where everyone has the chance to thrive.
And remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together.
Wow. It's amazing to think about everything we've talked about. We started with anxiety and depression, then explored bipolar disorder, PTSD, OCD, even eating disorders. And we didn't just skim the surface, we really dug deep.
It's been quite the journey. And those stories we shared, like Jessica's experience with GAD and how therapy helped her take back control, or John, that college student who seemed to have it all together but was secretly battling depression, those stories really hit home.
Those stories, they make it so real, you know? It's a reminder that behind every diagnosis, there's a person, a whole life, not just a label. And everyone has their own unique path to healing and well-being.
I couldn't agree more. And that brings us to what I think is the most important part. The idea of not just surviving, but thriving. Mental wellness, it's not just about the absence of illness. It's about creating a life that feels meaningful even when things are tough.
I love that. So we've covered self-care, getting help when you need it, being an advocate for change. But if someone's listening and thinking, okay, this is all great, but where do I even start? What's that one concrete step they can take today?
That's such a good question. It can feel really overwhelming, right? But try thinking about it this way. What's one small action you can take that aligns with what we've been talking about? Maybe it's finally making that therapy appointment you've been putting off, or even just reaching out to a friend who's been struggling and offering to listen.
Well, it doesn't have to be some big dramatic thing. It's those small acts of kindness and courage that, when we all do them, can create real change.
Exactly. Or maybe it's something just for you. What's something that always brings you joy, recharges your batteries? Taking a walk, listening to music, reading. Block out some time for that today. Make it a priority.
It's like investing in your own mental health.
Love that analogy. And remember, being an advocate can start with your own conversations. Share a mental health article online, talk about it with your friends, maybe even suggest a mental health initiative at work.
The more we talk about it, the more we break down the stigma, right?
Exactly. It's about creating a world where mental health isn't something we whisper about, but something we can discuss openly and honestly without shame.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about mental health conditions, but also about how to approach it in my own life and with the people I care about.
I've really enjoyed sharing this journey with you and with our listeners. Just remember, mental health is a lifelong journey. It's not a straight line. There will be bumps along the way. But by taking care of your mental well-being, seeking support when you need it, and speaking up for change, you can create a life that feels truly fulfilling.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore this fascinating and constantly evolving world of mental health.
It's been a pleasure. Keep learning, keep the conversation going, and until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.